Guschg Herdsman's Doll. Up in Guschg, an alpine meadow in the Valorschattel Valley near Schaan, a group of herdsmen and shepherds spent what little spare time they had making a life-size doll out of rags. They would speak with her, eat with her, and do many other things with her. Upon occasions, they would even beat her. As autumn arrived and the time came to bring the cows down from the meadow, the doll sat up one evening during dinner and began to speak. The herdsmen and farmers were so scared that they could hardly say a word. "All of you but one may leave the meadow to bring the animals down into the valley," she said. "But one must stay with me." Then she pointed to the herdsman she had chosen, and stay he did. As the remaining herdsmen and shepherds were driving the livestock down into the Valorschattel Valley, they turned and looked back up towards the meadow. There they saw the herdsman's skin stretched out across the roof of their mountain hut, with the doll sitting nearby laughing. The Entagled Mermaid. Long ago, in a far-off land, there lived a young mermaid who was very proud of her beauty. She was one of a family of mer or lake folk dwelling not far from the sea. Her home was a great pool of water that was half salt and half fresh, for it lay around an island near the mouth of a river. Part of the day, when the sea tides were out, she splashed and played, dived and swam in the soft water of the inland current. When the ocean heaved and the salt water rushed in, the mermaid floated and frolicked and paddled to her heart's content. Her father was a gray-bearded merryman, and very proud of his handsome, beautiful daughter. He owned an island near the river mouth, where the young mermaids held their picnics and parties, and received the visits of young mermen and other mermaids. Her mother and her two aunts were other mermaids, or merwomen as they were sometimes known. All of these were sober folk, and attended to the business which occupies all well-brought-up mermaids. This was to keep their pool clean and nice. No frogs, toads, or eels were allowed near, but in the work of daily house cleaning, the storks and the mermaids were great friends. All water creatures that were not thought to be polite and well-behaved were expected to keep away. Even some silly birds such as loons and plovers and all screaming and fighting creatures with wings were warned off the premises because they were not wanted. This family of merfolk liked to have nice, quiet time by themselves without any rude folk on legs or with wings or fins from the outside. Indeed, they wished to make their pool a model for all respectable mermaids. For 10 leagues around, it was a very funny thing to see the old daddy merman with a switch made of reeds shooting off the saucy birds, such as the sandpipers and screeching gulls. For the bullfrogs, too big for the storks to swallow, and for impudent fishes, he had a whip made of seaweed. Of course, all the mermaids in good society were welcome, but young mermen were allowed to call only once a month, during the week when the moon was full. Then the evenings were usually clear, so that when the party broke up, the mermen could see their way in the moonlight to swim home safely with their mermaid friends. For there were sea monsters that loved to plague the merfolk, and even threatened to eat them. The mermaids, dear creatures, had to be escorted escorted home, but they felt safe, for their merman brothers and strong mermaid sisters were so fierce that, except sharks, even the larger fish such as porpoises and dolphins were afraid to come near the strong mermaids and mermen. One day, her father and mother left to visit some relatives near the island of Guschg. They were to be gone several days. Meanwhile, their daughter was to have a party, her aunts being the chaperones. The mermaids usually held their picnics on an island in the midst of a pool. Here they would sit and sun themselves. They talked about the fashions and the prettiest way to dress their hair, their fins, and their bosoms. Each one had a pocket mirror, but where they kept these while swimming, no mortal ever found out. They made wreaths of bright-colored seaweed, orange and black, blue, gray, and red, and wore them on their brows like coronets. Or they twinned them along with sea berries and bubble blossoms among their tresses. Sometimes they made their girdles of the strongest and knotted them around their waists. Every once in a while they chose a queen of beauty for their ruler. Then each of the others was to be her princess. Their games and sports often lasted all day, and they were very happy. Swimming out in the salt water, the mermaids would go in quests for pearls, coral, ambergris, and other pretty things. These they would bring to their queen, or with them richly adorn themselves. Thus the mermaid queen and her maidens made a court of beauty that was famed wherever the mermaids and their friends lived. They often talked about the human women, human maids. How funny it must be to wear clothes, one said. Are they so cold that they have to keep warm? It was a little shit of a mermaid whose flippers had hardly begun to grow into hands that asked this question. How can they swim with their dresses and petticoats on? My sister heard that real men wear shoes of wood. These must bother them when on the water, to have their feet floating, said a third, whose name was Silver Scales. What a pity they don't have flukes like us. And then she looked at her own glistening, scaly coat in admiration. I can hardly believe it, said a mermaid that was very proud of her beautiful, curvy, and slender figure. The girls can't be half as pretty as we are. Well, I should like to be a real woman for a while, just to try it, and see how it feels to walk with legs, said another, rather demurely, as if afraid of the other mermaids might not like her remark. They didn't. Out sounded a lusty chorus. No, no, horrible, what an idea. Who wouldn't want to be a mermaid and change her life to be that of a mortal human woman? Why, I've heard, cried one, that human women have to work, wash their clothes, and milk cows, dig potatoes, scrub floors, take care of calves. Why on earth would someone want to be a woman? Not I. And her snub nose, since it could not turn up, grew wide at the roots. She was sneering at the idea that a creature in petticoats could ever look lovelier than one in shining scales. Besides, said she, think of their big noses, and I am told, too, that girls even have to wear pins in their hair. At this, the very thought that anyone should have to bind up their tresses, there was a shock of disgust with some, while others clapped their hands partly in envy and partly in glee. But the funniest things the mermaids heard were of gloves, and they had laughed heartily over such things as covers for the fingers. Just for fun, one of the little mermaids used to draw some bag-like seaweed over her hands to see how such things looked. One day, while sunning themselves in the grass on the island, one of their number found a bush on which foxgloves grew. Plucking these, she covered each one of her fingers with a red flower. Then, plopping over to the other girls, she held up her gloved hands, half in fright, half in envy. They heard her story. After listening, the party was about to break up, when suddenly a young merman splashed into view. The tide was running out and the stream low, so he had hard work to get through to the fresh water of the river and to the island. His eyes dropped salt water, as if he were crying. He looked tired while puffing and blowing, and he could hardly catch his breath. The Queen of the Mermaids asked him what he meant by coming among the mermaids at such an hour in such a condition. At this, the bashful young merman began to blubber. Some of the mergirls put their hands over their mouths to hide their laughing, while they winked at each other, and their eyes showed how they enjoyed the fun to see such a merman in a state. To have a merman among them at that hour in broad daylight and crying was too much for his dignity, and they found it hilarious. "Boo-hoo, boo-hoo," said the merman, and he wept still more salt-water tears as he tried to catch his breath. At last he talked sensibly. He warned the Queen Mermaid that a party of horrid humans in wooden shoes with pickaxes, spades, and pumps were coming to drain the swamp and pump out their pool. He had heard that they would make the river a canal and build a dike that should keep out the ocean. "Alas, alas," cried one beautiful mermaid, wringing her hands. "Where shall we go when our pool is destroyed? We can't live in the ocean all the time." Then she wept too, copiously. The salt water tears fell from her great, round green eyes in big drops. "Hush," said the queen. "I don't believe this merman story. He only tells it to frighten us. It's just like a man to do such a thing." In fact, the queen suspected that the merman story was all a sham, and that he had come among the mermaids with a set purpose to run off with their silver scales. She was one of the prettiest mermaids in the company, but very young, vain, and frivolous. It was no secret that she and the merman were in love, and she wanted to get married. So the queen, without even thanking him, dismissed the swimming messenger. After dinner, the company broke up, and the queen retired to her cave to take a long nap. She was quite tired, and after entertaining so much company. Besides, since the father and mother were away, there was no Bigus to entertain, and she, since it was dark night and no moon shining on the water, why should she need to get up early in the morning? So the mermaid queen slept much longer than ever before. Indeed, it was not till near the sunset of the next day that she awoke. Then, taking her comb and mirror in hand, she started to swim and splash in the pool in order to smooth out her tresses and get ready for supper. But oh, what a change from the day before. What was the matter? All around her things looked different. The water had fallen low, and the pool was nearly empty. The river, instead of flowing, was as quiet as a pond. Horrors! When she swam forward, what should she see but a dike and fences? An army of horrid humans had come, and when she was asleep built a dam. They had fenced round the swamp, and were actually beginning to dig sluices and to drain the land. Some were at work building a windmill to help in pumping out the water. The first thing she knew was she had bumped her pretty nose against the dam. She thought at once of escaping over the logs and into the sea. When she tried to clamber over the top and get through the fence, her hair had got so entangled between the bars that she had to throw away her comb and mirror and to try to untangle her tresses. The more she tried, the worse it became, the tangle. Soon her long hair was all twisted up in the timber. In vain were her struggles to escape. She was ready to die with fright when she saw 4 horrid humans rush up to seize her. She attempted to waddle away, but her long hair held her to the post rails. Her modesty was so dreadfully shocked that she fainted away. When she came to herself, she found she was in a big, long tub. A crowd of curious girls and boys were looking at her, for she was on show as a great curiosity. They were bound to see her and get their money's worth in looking, for they had paid a striver 2 cents admission to see the show. Again, before all these eyes, her modesty was so shocked that she gave one groan, flopped over, and died in her tub. Woe to the poor father and mother at Urk. They came back to find their old home gone. Unable to get into it, they swam out to sea, never stopping till they reached Spitzenbergen. What became of the body of the mermaid queen? Learned men came from Leiden to examine what was now only a specimen, and to see how mermaids were made up. Then her skin was stuffed, glass eyes put in, where her shining orbs had been. After this, her body was stuffed and mounted in the museum, that is, set up above a glass case and resting on iron rods. Artists came to Leiden to make pictures of her, and no fewer than 9 noblemen copied her pretty form and features into their coat of arms. Instead of the mermaid's pool is now a cheese farm of 50 cows, a fine house and barn, and a family of pink-cheeked, yellow-haired children who walk and play in wooden shoes. So this particular mermaid, all because of her entanglement, was more famous stuffed than living. All of her beautiful young friends and relatives were forgotten. Molly Whuppie. Once upon a time, there was a man and a woman, and they had far too many children, and they could not get meat for them. So they took the 3 youngest and left them in a forest. They traveled and could never see a house. It began to be dark, and they were hungry. At last they saw a light and made for it. It turned out to be a house. They knocked at the door, and a woman came to it, who said, "What do you want?" They said, "Please let us in and give us something to eat." The woman said, "I cannot do that, as a man here who is my man is a giant, and he would kill you if he comes home." They begged hard. "Let us stop for a little while," said they, "and we will go away before he comes." So she took them in and set them down before the fire and gave them milk and bread. But just as they had begun to eat, a great knock came to the door, and a dreadful voice said, "Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of some earthly one. Who have you there, wife?" "Eh," said the wife, "it is 3 poor little lassies, cold and hungry, and they will go away. You won't touch 'em." He said nothing, but ate up a big supper, and he ordered them to stay all night. Now that he had the 3 young girls of his own, and they were to sleep in the same bed with the 3 strangers. The youngest of the 3 strange lassies, whose name was Molly Whuppie, was indeed quite a clever young lady. She noticed that before they went to bed, the giant put straw ropes round her neck and her sisters' necks as well, and round his own lassies' necks he put gold chains. So Molly took care and did not fall asleep, but waited till she was sure everyone was sleeping sound. Then she slipped out of her bed and took the straw ropes of her own and her sisters' necks and took the gold chains off the giant's daughters. Then she put the straw ropes on the giant lassies and the gold on herself and her sisters and lay back down. And in the middle of the night, up rose the giant, armed with a great club, and felt for the necks with the straw. It was dark. He took his own lassies out of the bed onto the floor and battered them until they were dead, and then lay down again, thinking he had managed to finally destroy the young women. Molly thought it time she and her sisters were off and away, so she wakened them and told them to be quiet, and slipped out of the house. They all got out safe, and they ran and never stopped until morning, when they saw a grand house before them. It turned out to be a king's house. So Molly went in and told her story to the king. He said, "Well, Molly, you are a clever young lady, and you have managed well. But if you would manage better and go back and steal the giant sword that hangs on the back of his bed, I would give you and your eldest sister my eldest son to marry." Molly said she would try, so she went back and managed to slip into the giant's house and crept in below the bed. The giant came home and ate up a great supper and went to bed. Molly waited until he was snoring, and she crept out and reached over the giant and got down the sword. But just as she got it out over the bed, it gave a rattle. And up jumped the giant, and Molly ran out at the door, and the sword with her. And she ran, and he ran after her, till they came to the bridge of one hair. And she got over, but he couldn't, and he said, "Woe wath ye, Molly Whuppie, never ye come again." And she said, "Twice yet, quoth ye, I'll come to Spain." So Molly took the sword to the king, and her sister was married to the son. Well, the king said, "You have managed well, Molly, but if you would manage better and steal the purse that lies below the giant's pillow, I will marry your second sister to my second son." And Molly said she would try. So she set out for the giant's house and slipped in and hid again below the bed and waited till the giant had eaten his supper and was snoring sound asleep. She slipped out and slipped her hand below the pillow and got the purse. But just as she was going out, the giant wakened up and ran after her, and she ran and he ran till they came to the bridge of one hair. And she got over it, but he couldn't, and he said, "Woe worth ye, Molly Whuppie, never you come again. Once yet, Carter," she quoth, "I'll come to Spain." So Molly took the purse to the king, and her second sister was married to the king's second son. After that, the king says to Molly, "Molly, you are indeed a clever young lady, but if you would do better yet and steal the giant's ring he wears on his finger, I will give you my youngest son for yourself." Molly said she would try, so she went back to the giant's house and hides herself below the bed. The giant wasn't long until he came home, and after he had eaten a great big supper, he went to his bed and shortly was snoring loud. Molly crept out and reached over the bed and got hold of the giant's hand, and she pulled until she got off the ring. But just as she got it off the giant's hand, he got up and gripped her by the hand, and he said, "Now I have caught you, Molly Whuppie, and if I done as much to you, I'll do as you have done to me. What would ye do to me?" And then she said, "I would put you in a sack, and I'd put the cat inside with you, and the dog aside you, and a needle and thread, and shears, and I'd hang you upon the wall. And I'd go to the wood, and choose the thickest stick I could get, and I would come home and take you down and bang you till you were dead." "Well, Molly," said the giant, "I'll do just that to you then." So he gets a sack and puts Molly into it, and the cat and the dog beside her, and a needle and thread and shears, and hangs her up upon the wall, and goes to the wood to choose a stick. Molly sung out, "Oh, if ye saw what I see." "Oh," said the giant's wife, "what do you see, Molly?" But Molly never said a word but, "Oh, if ye saw what I see." The giant's wife begged to see that Molly would take her up into the sack until she would see what Molly saw. So Molly took the shears and cut a hole in the sack, and took out the needle and thread with her, and jumped down and helped the giant's wife up into the sack and sewed up the hole. The giant's wife saw nothing, and began to ask to get down again, but Molly never minded, but hid herself at the back of the door. Home came the giant, and a great big tree in his hand, and he took down the sack and began to batter it. His wife cried, "It's me!" But the dog barked and the cat meowed, and he did not know his wife's voice. But Molly came out from the back door, and the giant saw her and ran after her, and he ran and she ran till they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over it, but he could not. And he said, "Woe worth ye, Molly Whuppie, never you come again, never more, Carl." Quoth she, "Will I come again to Spain?" So Molly took the ring to the king, and she was married to his youngest son, and she never saw the giant again. The Lassie and her Godmother. Once upon a time, a poor couple lived far, far away in a great woods. The wife was brought to bed and had a pretty girl, but they were so poor they did not know how to get the babe christened, for they had no money to pay the parson's fees. So, one day the father went out to see if he could find anyone who was willing to stand for the child and pay for the fees. But though he walked about the whole day from one house to another, and though all said they were willing enough to stand, no one thought himself bound to pay the fees. Now when he was going home again, a lovely young lady met him, dressed so fine, and she looked so thoroughly good and kind, she offered to get the babe christened. But after that she said she must keep the young girl for her own. The husband answered he must first ask his wife what she wishes to do. But when he got home and told his story, the wife outright said no. Next day the man went out again, but no one would stand if they had to pay the fees, and though he begged and prayed, he could get no help. And again, as he went home towards evening, the same lovely young lady met him, who looked so sweet and good, and she made him the same offer. So he told his wife again how he had fared, and this time she said if he couldn't get anyone else to stand for his babe, next day they must just let the young lady have her way, since she seemed so kind and good. The third day the man went about, but he couldn't get anyone to stand. And so when towards evening he met the kind young lady again, he gave her his word she should have the babe daughter if she would only get it christened at the font. So the next morning she came to the place where the man lived, followed by two men to stand godfathers, took the babe and carried her to the church, and there she was christened. After that she took her to her own house, and there the small girl lived with her for several years, and her foster mother was always kind and friendly to her. Now when the lassie had grown to be big enough to know right from wrong, her foster mother got ready to go on a journey. "You have my leave," she said, "to go all over the house, except for those rooms, which I shew you." And when she had said that, and away she went. But the lassie could not forbear just to open one of the doors a little bit, when pop, out flew a star. When her foster mother came back, she was very vexed to find that the girl had opened the door and the star had flown out, and she got very angry with her foster daughter, and threatened to send her away, but the child cried and begged so hard that she got leave to stay. Now after a while the foster mother had to go on another journey, and before she went she forbade the lassie to go in those two rooms in which she had never been. She promised to beware, but when she was left alone, she began to think and to wonder what there could be in the second room, and at last she could not help setting the door a little ajar, just to peep in, when pop, out flew the moon. When her foster mother came home and found the moon to be let out, she was very downcast and said to the lassie she must go away. She could not stay with her any longer. But the lassie wept so bitterly and prayed so heartily for her forgiveness that this time too she got her leave to stay. Some time after, the foster mother had to go away again, and she charged the lassie, who by this time was a half-grown woman, most earnestly that she mustn't try to go into or peep into the third room. But when her foster mother had been gone some time, and the lassie was weary of walking about alone, all at once she thought, "Dear me, what fun it would be just to peep into that third room." Then she thought she mustn't do it for her foster mother's sake. But when the bad thought came the second time, she could hold out no longer. Come what might, she must and would look into that room. So she just opened the door a tiny bit when pop! Out flew the sun. But when her foster mother came back and saw that the sun had flown away, she was cut to the heart and said now there was no way to help for it. The lassie must and should go away. She couldn't hear of her staying any longer. Now the lassie cried her eyes out and begged and prayed so prettily, but it was just no good. "Nay, I must punish you," said her foster mother, "but you may have your choice, either to be the loveliest young woman in the world, and so not to be able to speak, or to keep your speech and be the ugliest of all women who walk upon the earth. But away from me you must go." And the lassie said, "I would sooner be lovely." So she became all at once wondrous fair, but from that day forth she was dumb. So when she went away from her foster mother, she walked and wandered through a great, great forest. But the farther she went, the farther off the end seemed to be. So when the evening came on, she climbed upon a tall tree which grew over a spring, and there she made herself up to sleep that night. Close by lay a castle, and from that castle came early every morning a young maid to draw water to make the prince's tea from the spring over which the lassie was sitting. So the young maid looked down into the spring, saw the lovely face in the water, and thought it was her own. Then she flung away the pitcher and ran home. And when she got there, she tossed up her head and said, "If I'm so pretty, I'm far too good to go and fetch your water." So another maid had to go for the water, but the same thing happened to her as well. She went back and said she was far too pretty and too good to fetch water from the spring for the prince. Then the prince went himself, for he had a mind to see what all this could mean. So when he reached the spring, he too saw the image in the water, but he looked up at once and became aware of the lovely lassie who sat there in the tree. Then he coaxed her down and took her home, and at last made up his mind to have her for his queen, because she was so lovely. But his mother, who was still alive, was completely against it. "She can't even speak," she said, "and maybe she's a wicked witch, who can say?" But the prince could not be content till he got her. So after they had lived together for a while, the lassie was to have a child. And when the child came to be born, the prince set a strong watch about her. But at the birth, one and all fell into a deep sleep, and her foster mother cut the babe on its little finger, and smeared the queen's mouth with the blood. "Now you shall be as grieved as I was when you let out the star." And with these words she carried off the babe. But when those who were on the watch woke, they thought the queen had eaten her own child, and the old queen was all for burning her alive. But the prince was so fond of her that at last he begged her off. But he had hard work to set her free. So the next time the young queen was to have a child, twice as strong a watch was set as it was the first time. But the same thing happened over again, only this time her foster mother said, "Now you shall be as grieved as was I when you let out the moon." And the queen begged and prayed and wept, for when her foster mother was there, she could speak, but it was all no good. And now the old queen said she must be burnt, but the prince found means to beg her off. But when the third child was to be born, a watch was set 3 times as strong as the first. But just the same thing happened. Her foster mother came while the watch slept, took the babe and cut its little finger and smeared the queen's mouth with the blood, telling her now she could be as grieved as she had been when she let out the sun. and now the prince could not save her any longer. She must and should be burned. But just as they were leading her to the stake, all at once they saw her foster mother, who came with all 3 daughters. 2 she led by the hand, and the 3rd she had upon her arm. So she went up to the young queen and said, "Here are your daughters. Now you shall have them again. I am the Virgin Mary, and so grieved as you have been, so grieved was I when you let out the sun and moon and star. Now you have been punished for what you did, and henceforth you shall have your speech." How glad the queen and prince now were, all may easily think, but no one can tell. After that they were always happy, and from that day, even the prince's mother was very fond of the young queen. The 3 Princesses of Whiteland. Once upon a time, there was a fisherman who lived close by a palace and fished for the king's table. One day, when he was out fishing, he just caught nothing. Do what he would. However, he tried. With bait and angle, there was never a sprat on his hook. But when the day was far spent, a head bobbed up out of the water and said, "If I may have what your wife bears under her girdle, you shall catch fish enough." So the man answered boldly, "Yes," for he did not know that his wife was pregnant. After that, as was like enough, he caught plenty of fish of all kinds. But when he got home at night and told his story, how he had got all that fish, his wife fell a weeping and moaning, and was beside herself for the promise which her husband had made. For she had said, "Husband, I am pregnant. I bear a babe under my girdle." Well, the story soon spread, and came up to the castle. And when the king heard the woman's grief and its cause, he sent down to say he would take care of the child and see if he couldn't save it. So the months went on, and when the time came for her to give birth, she had given birth to a boy. So the king took it at once and brought it up as his own son, until the lad grew up. Then he begged leave one day to go out fishing with his father. He had such a mind to go. He said, at first the king wouldn't hear of it, but at last the lad had his way and went. So he and his father were out the whole day, and all went right and well till they landed at night. Then the lad remembered he had left his handkerchief and went to look for it, but as soon as ever he got into the boat, it began to move off with him at such a speed that the water roared under the bow, and all the lad could do in rowing against it with the oars was of no use. So he went and went the whole night, and at last came to a white strand far, far away. There he went ashore, and when he had walked about a bit, an old man met him with a long white beard. "What is the name of this land?" asked the lad. "Whiteland," said the man, who went on to ask the lad whence he came and what he was going to do. So the lad told him all. Aye, said the man. "Now, when you have walked a little farther along the strand here, you'll come to 3 princesses whom you will see standing in the earth up to their necks, with only their heads out. Then the first, she is the eldest, will call out and beg so prettily to come and help her. And the second will do the same. To neither of these shall you go. Make haste past them. as if you neither saw nor heard anything from them. But the third you shall go and do whatever she asks. If you do this, you'll have good luck. That's all. When the lad came to the first princess, she called out to him and begged him so prettily to come to her. But he passed on as though he saw her not. In the same way he passed by the second woman, but to the third he went straight up. If you'll do what I bid you, she said, you may have which of us you please. Yes, he was willing enough. So she told him how 3 trolls had set them down in the earth there, but before they had lived up in the castle among the trees. Now, she said, you must go into the castle and let the trolls whip you each one night for each of us. If you can bear that, you'll set us free. Well, the lad said, he was ready to try. When you go in, the princess went on to say, you'll see 2 lions standing at the gate. But if you'll only go right in the middle between them, they'll do you no harm. Then go straight on into a little dark room and make your bed. Then the troll will come to whip you. But if you take the flask which hangs on the wall and rub yourself with the ointment that's in it, wherever his lash falls, you'll be as sound as ever. Then grasp the sword that hangs by the side of the flask and strike the troll dead. Yes, he did as the princess told him. He passed in the midst between the lions, as if he hadn't seen them, and went straight into the little room, and there he lay down to sleep. The first night there came a troll with 3 heads and 3 rods, and whipped the lad soundly. But he stood it till the troll was done. Then he took the flask and rubbed himself, and grasped the sword and slew the troll. So when he went out next morning, the princesses stood out of the earth up to their waists. The next night 'twas the same story over again. Only this time the troll had 6 heads and 6 rods, and he whipped him far worse than the night first. But when he went out next morning, the princesses stood out of the earth as far as their knees. The third night there came a troll that had 9 heads and 9 rods, and he whipped and flogged the lad so long that he fainted away. Then the troll took him up and dashed him against the wall. But the shock brought down the flask which fell on the lad, burst and spilled the ointment all over him, and so he became as strong and sound as ever again. Then he wasn't slow. He grasped the sword and slew the troll. And next morning when he went out of the castle, the princesses stood before him with all their bodies out of the earth. So he took the youngest young woman for his queen, and lived well and happily with her for some time. At last he began to long to go home for a little to see his parents. His queen did not like this, but at last his heart was so set on it, and he longed and longed so much that there was no holding him back. And so she said, "One thing you must promise me. This, only do what your father begs you to do, and not what your mother wishes." And that he promised. Then she gave him a ring, which was of that kind that anyone who wore it might wish 2 wishes. So he wished himself home. And when he got home, his parents could not wonder enough what a grand man their son had become. Now when he had been at home some days, his mother wished him to go up to the palace and show the king what a fine man he had come to be. What a fine fellow indeed he was. But his father said, "No, I don't let him do that. If he does, we shan't have any more joy of him this time." But it was no good. The mother begged and prayed so long that at last he went. So when he got up to the palace, he was far braver, both in clothes and array, than the other king, who didn't quite like this, and at last he said, All very fine, but here you can see my queen. What like she is, but I can't see yours, that I can't. Do you know, I scarce think she's so good looking as mine. Would to heaven, said the young king, she were standing here, then you'd see what she was like. And that instant there she stood before them. But she was very woeful, and said to him, Why did you not mind what I told you? And why did you not listen to what your father said? Now I must away home, and as for you, you have had both your wishes. With that she knitted a ring amongst her hair with her name on it, and wished herself home and was off. Then the young king was cut to the heart, and went day out, day in, thinking and thinking how he should get back to his queen. I'll just try, he thought, if I can't learn where Whiteland lies. And so he went out into the world to ask. So when he had gone a good way, he came to a high hill, and there he met one who was lord over all the beasts of the world, for they all came home to him when he blew his horn. So the king asked if he knew where Whiteland was. No, I don't, said he, but I'll ask my beasts. Then he blew his horn and called them, and asked if any of them knew where Whiteland lay. But there was no beast that knew. So the man gave him a pair of snowshoes. When you get on these, he said, you'll come to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles off. He is lord over all the birds of the air. Ask him. When you reach his house, just turn the shoes so that the toes point this way, and they'll come home of themselves. So when the king reached the house, he turned the shoes as the lord of the beasts had said, and away they went home and of themselves. So he asked again after Whiteland, and the man called all the birds with the blast of his horn, and asked if any of them knew where Whiteland lay. But none of the birds knew. Now long after the rest of the birds came, an old eagle which had been away 10 round years, but he couldn't tell any more than the rest. Well, said the man, I'll lend you a pair of snowshoes, and when you get them on, they'll carry you to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles off. He's lord of all the fish in the sea. You'd better ask him, but don't forget to turn the toes of the shoes this way. The king was full of thanks, got on the shoes, and when he came to the man who was lord over the fish of the sea, he turned the shoes toes round, and so off they went home like the other pair. After that he asked again after Whiteland. So the man called the fish with a blast, but no fish could tell where it lay. At last came an old pike, which they had great work to call home. He was such a way off. So when they asked him, he said, Know it? I should think I did. I've been cook there 10 years, and tomorrow I'm going there again. For now the queen of Whiteland, whose king is away, is going to wed another husband. Well, said the man, as this is so, I'll give you a bit of advice. Hereabouts on a moor stand 3 brothers, and here they have stood these 100 years, fighting about a hat, a cloak, and a pair of boots. If anyone has three things, he can make himself invisible, and wish himself anywhere he pleases. You can tell them you wish to try the things, and after that you'll pass judgment between them, whose they shall be. Yes, the king thanked the man, and went and did as he told him. What's all this? He said to the brothers. Why do you stand here fighting forever and a day? Just let me try these things, and I'll give judgment whose they shall be. They were very willing to do this, but as soon as he had got the hat, cloak, and boots, he said, When we meet next time, I'll tell you my judgment. And with these words he wished himself away. So as he went along up into the air, he came up with the north wind. Whither away? Roared the north wind. To Whiteland, said the king, and then he told him all that had befallen him. Ah, said the north wind, you go faster than I. you do, for you can go straight, while I have to puff and blow round every turn and corner. But when you get there, just place yourself on the stairs by the side of the door, and then I'll come storming in, as though I were going to blow down the whole castle. And then when the prince who is going to have your queen comes out to see what's the matter, you just take him by the collar and pitch him out of the doors. Then I'll look after him and see if I can't carry him off." Well, the king did as the north wind said. He took his stand on the stairs, and when the north wind came storming and roaring and took hold of the castle wall so that it shook again, the prince came out to see what was the matter. But as soon as ever he came, the king caught him by the collar and pitched him out of the doors, and then the north wind caught him up and carried him off. So when there was an end of him, the king went into the castle, and at first his queen didn't know him. He was so wan and thin from traveling far and being so woeful. But when he shewed her the ring, she was as glad could be, and so the rightful wedding was held, and the fame of it spread far and wide.